Hey everyone, it's Spencer Hakimian and welcome back to another episode of What's Moving Your Money. I hope everyone had a very nice Labor Day and we are getting into the fall season. It's about to get very busy in the economics world. So I want to today spend our episode talking about the alarming rise in yields that we've been seeing both in the United States and around the world. Then I want to go into why this is happening despite of the fact that the Federal Reserve is beginning to cut interest rates and those rate cuts are already essentially all priced into the puzzle. What the root causes of this issue is, and in fact why this is actually a repeat of the exact same thing that happened last fall. So we have a very busy episode. Sit back tight and I hope you guys enjoy. So around the world, but in particular in the United States, Japan, and France, we have long yields spinning out of control. 10 to 30-year bonds are rapidly falling in price in the past couple of weeks. And the reasons are multiple and they're nuanced, but for this purpose of this episode, let's just focus on the United States because that's where most of the audience is. We have simply too much supply of debt that we have to issue in the United States. Every year, our deficit, both in absolute terms and in relative terms, is expanding. We have the largest deficit in 2025 in any peacetime year since World War II. We are literally permanently spending money at crisis levels. We haven't spent this much money relative to our GDP that we did not have since 2008, since 2020, before that, since the Cold War. It is just a snowball effect. And what happens is that over time, the supply of bonds becomes much greater than the demand to buy those bonds. And just like any other market in the world, bonds are based off of supply and demand. When supply is much higher than demand, the price falls. And since we're talking about bonds, when the price falls, that means the yield rises. I want you guys to keep that in mind anytime we talk about bonds on this podcast. Price fall, yields rise. You can think of it the same way as a stock with a dividend yield. If the price falls on a stock and the dividend remains the same, well, then the dividend yield just rose relative to the price. So it is the same idea. And we basically have a problem in the United States where yields are spiraling and it is going to affect you in many different ways. So let's get into that next. So the rise in long bond yields materially impacts your life because almost every loan that a consumer or a business or a family or a household can get is based off of 10 to 30-year bonds. It is not based off the Fed funds rate. This is a critical mistake that mainstream media does not talk about enough. The Fed funds rate is simply the overnight rate that banks charge one another. It often has little correlation to the long end of the yield curve. When you get a mortgage, when you get a car loan, when you get a credit card loan, when you get a line of credit for your business, when you want to get a loan on a real estate investment, this is all based off of longer duration bonds. The Fed funds has a minimal impact on that, especially when you are in a situation of fiscal dominance like we are in, where the front end of the yield curve is arbitrarily being pulled down by political forces, not by natural market forces. I want to ask you guys a question. Do you have any loans that are coming up soon? And if so, what duration are those loans? Because if you are planning to extend a 10-year loan, you are going to not benefit that much from these rate cuts that we are going to be getting soon. So let me know in our comments what you think about these rate cuts. Now, one other thing that we got to talk about in terms of Fed cuts is we don't have to wait as market participants for the rate cuts to happen for us to price it in. Everyone knows that the Fed fund is going to be cut 1, 2, potentially even 3 times in the balance of 2025. So if you go look at 2-year bonds, the yields have already fallen substantially because no one's gonna wait for that to get confirmed. All of those trades get front ran. So oftentimes when you're in a situation where you are cutting interest rates, the stimulus, the benefit of that happens way before the cuts actually happen. And then ironically, what ends up happening is once the cuts end up actually occurring, it might become a sell the news kind of event where yields might actually rise, although interest rates were physically cut on that day because it's already been priced in for months. So you have to consider that markets are forward-looking price mechanisms. They already plan these things well ahead of time. Nothing in markets waits until exactly when it happens. It is all priced in from well in advance. So that is quite important to know. And now, if you guys think that any of this is novice or new, it's not. Even just go back only 12 months ago when the Federal Reserve aggressively cut by 50 basis points in September of 2024, and then another 25 in November of 2024, and then another 25 in December of 2024. The Federal Reserve cut their Fed funds rate by 100 basis points last fall from 5.33 to 4.33%. What happened to the 10-year yield in that exact same time span? It went up by 100 basis points. So the Fed cut by 100 and actual yields to the real economy went up by 100. If you go on my TikTok and on my Instagram, my handle is Spencer Hakimian, you will see I made a video detailing all of this and how those Fed cuts from last year actually had a negative effect on the economy when it was all said and done. One thing that really I strongly want to stress, and then you have to consider it, is that again, you do not borrow at the Fed funds rate. The Fed funds rate rarely impacts you unless you have a variable rate 1-year loan, a bridge loan that is based off of right in the front of the yield curve. This rarely is going to get through to you. If you are a participant in the real economy, if you are a business, if you are a household, if you are a homeowner, you have to look at the 10-year yield. You have to look at the 30-year yield. It is meaningless what the Fed funds does. Ironically, by forcing these rate cuts that possibly we don't need with all of this inflation that we have in our system, you actually end up adding inflation premium into the 10 and 30-year yield, and you end up raising real borrowing costs. This was the exact same mistake the Federal Reserve made last fall. They cut aggressively when they did not need to. Last fall, real GDP was growing at 3%. Real. That means 6% nominally, and the Fed still aggressively cut. And what ended up happening? Borrowing costs rose. Look, right now we have a weakening job market, but we have an inflation problem right now in the United States. And it's only going to get worse as these tariffs continue to progress and marinate into our system. By cutting rates right now, we are already seeing adverse effects, and I fear we are doing a repeat of September 2024 in September of 2025. And I want you guys to let me know in the comments before you go what you think. Are Fed cuts right now necessary? Are they a mistake? Do you think there should be some nuance around this? Let me know, and I can't wait to see you guys in a few days. Thank you for watching.